Welcome to the TKN Leadership Podcast with Matthew Watley. I'm your host, Dr. Daryl Williams. Listen, this week I have a special guest with me. He is the leader of the AND campaign, Justin Giboney. You know what they say, if you want to stay out of trouble, stay away from faith and politics, and he's made a career of diving into both of them. So join me today as we welcome Justin Giboney. Justin, so good to have you with us today.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Williams.
Oh, man, it's awesome just to have you with us today. Tell everybody a little bit about yourself. Tell us the Justin Giboney story.
Sure. So I am a political strategist, ordained minister, and also an attorney. And I'm the founder of the AND campaign. But I'm originally from Denver, Colorado. I live in Atlanta now, the son of a PK. Okay. So I grew up in the church, Church and Living God, PGT Nation. And so just, going through life after going to law school, getting into politics, I worked for the mayor of Atlanta for about 7 years, was just trying to find a way to really bring my faith together with what I was doing in politics, because I felt there was a separation. And so I ended up creating the AND campaign to really combine faith and politics rather than leaning on ideology or party.
Now, let's talk about that a little bit. In the world we live in of hyperpolarization, some would say that one party owns faith, another party is doing this. You wanted to bring them together in a way that wasn't partisan. Tell us a little bit about what that looks like.
Yeah, I noticed Christians, as I was running campaigns in the city of Atlanta, I just noticed Christians were, as soon as they knew they wanted to run for office, it's like they had to leave part of their convictions behind. So if you're in a progressive space, there's certain stuff you're not going to talk about marriage and all that stuff. If you're in more conservative space, maybe it's some of the compassion side of the conversation. And I'm like, this doesn't make sense. Sure. Because when I read the Bible had compassion and conviction. It had love and truth. It didn't have the separation of those two things that you see in the public square, where you have justice Christians over here where all they talk about is social justice, morality Christians over here where all they talk about is morality. I saw Jesus talking about both and bringing those together. So I started thinking, how do we better articulate and apply the gospel to our current circumstances in our political landscape? And that's really where it came from.
So when you dive into that space, you're dealing with, I'm assuming, both politicians, political candidates, and the public. Yeah. Where is the big challenge you see for people in integrating their faith and their politics?
Well, our political system has two sides.
Sure.
And so people, when they go into politics or when they think about politics, they think about it through Democrat, Republican, progressive, conservative. That's all. That's the framework that's been given to us. Mm-hmm. So that's really how Christians think about it. But what I know as an attorney is I can ask you a question with two wrong answers.
Sure.
So when somebody asks you a question with two wrong answers, you can't get it right. But what did Jesus do in that circumstance? When he's asked a question with two wrong answers, he reframes the question. And I think what Christians need to do, instead of accepting that we have to be progressive or we have to be conservative, we need to reframe the question and answer it in a way that is more faithful. And so that's what the AND campaign is trying to do. It's not, when we answer a question, we're not just talking about doctrinal issues. We're not just talking about love. We're combining those things and saying, how can we answer in a way that's faithful to Scripture and also loving of our neighbor, which we see in the gospel. And unfortunately, I don't think we've been doing that. I think we've been leaning on the parties to create the answers for us and then just choosing which one is less offensive to us.
Gotcha. So one of the challenges is not wanting to offend people.
Yeah.
But we all know, and in the Christian space, those of us who are believers, it tells us that the gospel is an offense. Mm-hmm. So what is it that, from a leadership perspective, you think makes people want to shy away from offense when they talk about their faith? I mean, I know everybody wants to get votes, but where's the challenge for a leader who wants to be true to their faith?
That's the tough part, because politics can be a blood sport.
Sure.
But we are Christians. We're crucified with Christ.
Sure.
We have to go in there not to offend, but being willing to say what's necessary to make sure the truth is heard, to make sure people know the will of God. And so I understand why people stray away from that. You don't want to take the arrows. You don't want to necessarily lose members and things of that nature. But I think if you approach it in the right way, you can do so with integrity. And that's really what it has to be at the end of the day. If people, it was Jesus too. At the height of his ministry, mm-hmm. he gives a talk on something that made people go away.
Absolutely.
Right? So it can't just be about getting more people following you. I think under certain circumstances that can happen, but you got to be willing to say what's right and what's loving, regardless of what the consequences are going to be.
Sure. So if you got a leader and they are a person of faith, but they're struggling a little bit with how to express that, because one of the challenges that folk will sometimes have is, what is the language I can put around these things? Let's help our audience a little bit. What's some of the language we can put around our faith that creates integrity but also faithfulness when we talk about it?
Yeah, I think that's a good thing. The one thing I always say, before you want somebody to accept your faith in the conversation, let them know that you respect their opinions and their beliefs too.
Sure.
Right. So one thing that we kind of do, and I think the moral majority and religious right got this totally wrong, is we just go in throwing Bibles at people's heads saying this is the way you have to live and that's it. Mm-hmm. Rather than having a conversation and saying, I want to hear what you believe and why. Sure. And what I try to do is, even if I disagree with somebody, I want to know the good that they're trying to get at, because most people aren't just malicious.
Sure.
If they support a policy or even something you disagree with, it's for a reason. It's for some good that they're trying to achieve, and we start to refute them before we even know the good they're trying to achieve. So that's the first thing that I try to do. I respect you and your beliefs. What are they? Help me understand what you believe. And then at that point, you have to express what you believe in a way that they can hear, right? Sure. Christians, I'm not a Christian nationalist. I don't believe I read some of the Bible, I say, okay, this has to be the law right now and everybody has to accept it. That's not the democratic process.
Sure.
If I truly believe something and what I believe should come out of the gospel, if I believe it, then I have to persuade people that it's the right thing, because they might not believe the same book that I believe. So I have to show them not just this is what God said and you have to do it. I have to show what's the practical value to everybody. Right? That's the democratic process.
So you're really talking about expanding the conversation.
Expand the conversation.
Because we have sort of narrowed into my side, your side with hyperpolarization. So we're expanding the conversation, because you tell me if I'm right about this. I think that people on both sides have, now everybody doesn't have a good heart, let's just be clear about that. But the vast majority of people want what they think is best. They just have two different ways of thinking about getting there.
Right.
So what would you tell somebody who wants to help move the conversation forward, but is challenged by being in a pluralistic society? Let me explain what I mean by that a little bit more. We have this notion that has been created that America's a Christian country founded on Christian values and everything's going to be that way. But if you look at the history of America, it's a pluralistic society.
Yeah.
So how do you advise or coach the Christian or the leader that is challenged with dealing with pluralism?
Yeah, so you and I would probably disagree with religious pluralism. Like, we're not pluralistic within our church as far as our theology.
Absolutely.
But we do live in a society where people have different beliefs, and they have a right to have those beliefs.
Yes.
So the first thing that I want to say to somebody is, you have a right to your beliefs, and you have a right to tell people about it, and you have a right to disagree with me, right? And vehemently, because we're not talking about small things here. We're talking about life and death issues that we have disagreements on. But guess what? They have the right to believe that, and I will protect their right to say what they say and have the beliefs that they have. When you come from that perspective, it's not just win or lose. It's like, no, I'm going to respect you whether you agree with me or not. It says that you're coming from a place of good faith. It says this isn't just a zero-sum game where I'm trying to destroy you. No, I want to come to the best solutions. And if at the end of the day we come to a place where we can't completely agree, how do we do the hard work of democracy and find a compromise that we can live with?
How do we find a solution
to the common problem? Right. How do we find a solution that maybe neither of us getting exactly what we want, that's a compromise in it, that allows us to move forward in a constructive way as a society who's always going to have those disagreements?
Now, that's the challenge, I think, for some people. We have gotten to a point where compromise seems to be a bad word, because people have gotten to the point where they sort of think, if I compromise, I'm giving something up and I'm moving away from what I believe. What would you say to get somebody to understand that compromise, especially if we're talking about politics and policy, is part of the game?
Yeah, and I'm not talking about compromising your personal convictions in what you do.
Yes.
I'm talking about understanding in a pluralistic society, you have to find policy and you have to be able to move forward.
Right.
So the first thing that you do is you try to persuade them. You do try to persuade them to get them to see what you're saying. But when it comes to a point where there's just a disagreement and you can't get any further, sometimes you do have to say, okay, I'm not going to compromise my convictions, but as far as this policy may not perfectly reflect my convictions because there's a critical mass of people outside of my group that disagree with me.
Sure.
And that's the way that constitutional republics work.
So what I hear you saying is the policy doesn't have to be my convictions, but I want to move it as close to my beliefs as possible.
The policy doesn't have to perfectly meet your convictions, and rarely is that the case.
Okay.
But for us, and here's again where I disagree with the Christian nationalists, Christianity is not even about forcing people to be you and do everything that you do, right? It's in general, when it's going to come to policy, it's like, well, I want to protect people. I want to make sure people aren't starving or whatever. But we're not here to force people to agree with everything that we say, right? We want to try to persuade them and let them know, no, this is why it's a benefit to everybody in general.
Gotcha. So let's delve into leadership a little bit. You are the founder of the AND campaign, which was founded in 2016.
That's
correct?
Right.
So you've been doing it for, that's 7 years now.
Yeah.
You started from, I don't want to say started from the bottom, now we're here, but you starting launching a campaign like that, launching an organization like that, because so many organizations fail and you've been succeeding for the last 7 years. Tell us a little bit about how you started and the foundations you laid in place that, looking back, have helped you to grow, expand, and continue.
Well, the first thing that for me was just that foundation of faith.
Sure.
People say, because I was working in the mayor's office, I've been working there for almost 8 years. Man, how'd you step out and take that leap of faith? But for me, I really felt like God didn't give me a choice.
Sure.
It was like, no, you're not going to stay here. You have to come do this.
Gotcha.
So it was prayerful. I had to say, okay, how am I prayerful? But before I stepped out, I was going around the Christian community, meeting with as many people as I could, anybody who would listen to me. And that's why I say any crowd I'm in front of now, I'm thankful, because it was just me in the mirror for a long time.
Sure.
But I was just any pastor that would listen to how I was trying to frame how Christians should engage. I would just have conversations. I'm talking about hundreds of conversations with people. And then also serving, making sure they knew I'm not trying to get anything from you. I'm trying to help the church. And that takes time. So I had to have some patience. I had to say, okay, I'm not going to come in here. There's a reason there's gatekeepers. Sure. Right? You can't just let everybody in. But if you're serious about this and you're willing to take the time that it's going to take to really be able to communicate, and that's when people allow you to come and speak to their church, because they see you're in it for the right reason. So that patience is important, because I think one thing that happens is once we create something and it's a good idea, we want everybody to see it as a good idea and accept it automatically. That's just not the way things go. So if that's what God told you to do, you stay in there and get it done. But our big thing for the AND campaign, as far as the framework, is theology. Yeah. What the Bible says matters. So me and Dr. Williams have a disagreement on a policy or whatever. Okay, let's see if the Bible speaks clearly to this. And if it does, and if it's on the other side of where I am, then I got to say, hey, that's right. Right? So on the very tough issues, whether it's marriage, whether it's the sanctity of life, all those things, what the Bible says matters. Because otherwise, it's just our thoughts coming up with what the answer is.
So what I'm hearing you say in launching this is that convictions matter.
Absolutely.
Your conviction that this is what God was calling you to do gave you the strength to knock on all those doors and keep knocking on all those doors and keep knocking on all those doors. Your conviction to serve gave you the strength to be able to say, listen, I'm not just here for me. There's something that I'm offering as a service to you and your church. And your convictions about your faith undergird what you do.
Absolutely.
So leadership conviction. When you're starting something, you got to be convicted.
A sense of mission, a sense of conviction and purpose. That's what's going to pull you through those hard times. 'Cause everybody ain't going to hear you. Some people are like, what are you even talking about? That doesn't seem real to me, like it could really happen. And you just got to stand in there and believe, stay prayerful, and then moment by moment, God is using those times to prepare you for what you're coming into, to prepare you to have the conversation that you need to have, prepare you to be online and people coming at your neck, and you don't have to react every time in a negative way. Those things were useful as well. But that foundation of faith and believing, because there's so many times, whether it's for fundraising purposes or whatever, that you could compromise what those convictions are. The other thing I would tell somebody who's in leadership, your ministry belongs to God. It doesn't belong to you. So anytime for us, there's somebody asking us to compromise what we believe, it's not up to me.
Right.
I don't get to compromise that side of it, and that's where you don't compromise, right?
Gotcha.
In your personal and in the convictions of the organization.
So it starts off with you, and you've got a couple folk who are willing to hear you. Tell us about how it began to expand, where it was more than just you, and some of the leadership challenges of going from being sort of a solo show to having to manage more than just your own calendar.
So by the time it becomes an AND campaign, it's three of us. The initial idea is me in politics saying this has to change.
Yeah.
Like I can't. In fact, I was at the Democratic National Convention. I was a delegate, an Obama delegate at the Democratic National Convention. I just heard and saw some things that was like, I have to help Christians distinguish themselves because this
ain't it.
This ain't it.
Gotcha.
We can't just accept this and think that it's cool. So what I do in the midst of kind of going around talking to as many pastors as I could, I meet a Christian artist named Shobaraka.
Okay.
And so we start talking. I meet also Angel Maldonado, who's a pastor in Atlanta, and we all kind of come together and start talking. They were the most interested, and so I was like, well, let's talk. And so it didn't have a name or anything. And from there, we started expanding. Shobaraka, because he was a very well-known Christian artist, already had kind of a following, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And so when the AND campaign came out, he was kind of the launching pad for that. Angel comes up with the name, the AND campaign, which literally means compassion and conviction, which means we're not choosing between the love of Christ or the truth of Christ, right? Mm-hmm. We're putting both of those together in the same way the gospel does.
Gotcha. And
it just starts to come together from there. So we're going from church to church, whatever we can get on, any show that we can get on, talking about this framework and how it can help Christians engage in a more Christian way.
So you found people who shared purpose, mission, and conviction and worked together.
Yeah.
See, I think many times leaders will, it sounds to me like everybody brought a different gift set, skill set to this. Yeah. And you were all able to move as equals to move the mission forward. Talk to leaders a little bit about the transition of being able to work with not subordinates but equals as you try to move forward.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other part of it. As I was doing this myself, I was in it long enough to say I need people.
Yeah.
I don't want to be doing this alone for a number of reasons. And so when it came to the creative side of it, that's what Show did, right? Mm-hmm. He was able to dress things up and put our message out there in a way that was very artistic, that captured people. Mm-hmm. Angel, when it came to either the theology of it or the pastoral side of it, what are people in pews actually saying? What questions are they asking? And he can bring that back to us, and we say, okay, here's how we have to address not just what we think is important, or I think from this political space, what are people in the pews actually saying, and what do they need to hear? And when you've been at it by yourself for a little bit and you find the right people, it's you open up and you say, please, thank you. You know, I'm glad to see people are with me. And it just really came together because we have respect for one another too. We're able to stay within our lanes. If we had disagreements, we knew that the mission was bigger than that disagreement.
Gotcha. So where's the AND campaign going from here? What are you guys doing now, and what are you looking forward to doing as time goes forward?
Yeah, we have a lot of things I'm really excited about. So the main thing that we're trying to do is, number one, we want to raise civic literacy. So we go to churches and other spaces to teach people about politics and just the X's and O's of it. How do I engage in the most effective manner? You know
what happened to civic literacy? I remember civics class. I remember, if nothing else, now I may be dating myself, there was a kind of an after-school special on how a bill becomes a law, like that sort of thing. So you're bringing that back in a different way.
Yeah, we're bringing that back. Like, how does this actually work, and why is it important for you to know your politicians, people around you? So we had so many people, especially during the 2020 and all that, were so serious about social justice, and that was great. And they were out marching, things like that. But if you ask them who their DA was, they didn't know.
No idea.
Right?
Yeah.
And so we're telling people, no, you need to know that. You need to be engaged in a real way. So we have the civic literacy. Then it's about the reframing of the issue. So using Christian theology to say, no, I know how Democrats present this and how Republicans present it. How should Christians think about it?
What's a Christian view?
What's a Christian view of how this issue is to work, right? Is it I either hate somebody or I completely affirm everything they say, or is it say, no, I can love somebody and disagree with them?
Sure.
That's actually, we do it every day, but the framework that we get from society isn't going to tell us that, right? It's like either you agree with them on everything or you hate them.
Right.
It's like that's not how things work. So we want to create that framework. So some of the things that we do, we have a Christian civic leadership academy, and so what we do is we train folks over a 10-week period to either run for office, work on campaigns, things like that. And so we brought cohorts through of people who say, I'm Christian, I want to get engaged in politics more. Where do I go from here?
Right.
We bring them through. So we talk about the X's and O's of politics, of campaigns. What's the anatomy of a campaign? We go through the ethics of it, communications, bringing in special speakers. It's really been a special time. And then we have chapters. So we want to galvanize on a national level. So I speak at a lot of national national platforms, but we want to work on a local level. So we have 15 chapters in different cities where we're asking them, number one, spread the framework to all the biblical churches in your area. We want that to be diverse. And then once they get to a certain point, actually engage your community with its needs on that local level.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So when let's go local for a second. When you're working with somebody to engage their community, where do you tell them to start? Because let's just admit it, most people, if you ask them, you said they're DA, most people don't know who their city council person is, who their county council person is. Yeah. How do you get folks started at that granular local level of these are the government officials that affect you the most directly?
Yeah, so the first thing you have to do, you have to educate yourself. Yeah. You have to take the time to be informed. So what that means, reading your local newspaper, and sharing this stuff, because not everybody's going to have time every day to be watching everything that's going on with City Hall. But you do this as a body, right? And start to just educate yourself on who are the players, what are the major issues. You might even go to City Council and just sit and watch, or watch most of the City Council meetings are on video. You can watch it online. Go watch it online to see what's going on. So that's the first stage. Know what you're talking about, and then do it. Politics is not an individual game. If you try to do it by yourself, you're going to fail. It's something that be done by a critical mass of people. So how do you start to organize? Well, when you start to organize, and this is something I did with the AND campaign, what's your story? What's the story that you're telling people? Now, it should be a truthful one. Not always in politics are we telling truthful stories, but I think for us, one of my big things is what is the narrative and story that I'm telling people to let them know why this is so important and how we're getting it so wrong.
Sure.
That's a major part of organizing. And then it's just hustling. It's getting the people, knocking on those doors, letting them know, the resources that you provide, and going from there. And then saying, okay, what's a priority in our community? How are people really hurting? And how can we get people who may be Democrats or Republicans, maybe white evangelicals or from Black traditional church, to come together to say, we don't have to agree on everything. We need to fix this just as Christians.
Gotcha. Now, you brought up something that I'm really curious about. I've been Black all my life. You've been Black all your life. You're bringing together people who believe in the same Jesus when you're bringing together Black churches and white evangelical churches, but approach it from vastly different ways. Yeah. How do you bridge that ground? Because every church has a pastor, every pastor is a leader on some level, and leaders will often bump heads.
Yeah.
How do you get those vastly different cultures who say they have the same belief system and believe the same God, the same Jesus, the same Bible, to see the world in a way that reflects how the other one sees it?
It's not easy, for one. So it's not something we're 100% at, but we have gotten things done, and it's been great to see when that does come together. The first thing I try to do is get people to drop the ideology.
Gotcha.
So many people don't know the difference between their ideology and their religion and their theology.
Say a little bit about that. I want everybody to understand exactly what you mean by that.
Yeah, I think we're so engulfed in ideology, progressivism and conservatism. So if I'm a conservative, then I believe these tenets of conservatism, whether it be on national defense, whether it be on a kind of rugged individualism.
Sure.
Right? So I really internalize those things. Well, rugged individualism isn't Christianity. Right? That's your ideology.
It is not Christianity.
That's not your theology.
Yeah.
But most people haven't taken the time to separate those things. So on both sides, we have to separate those things. One thing that I always say is, the gospel is not neutral, so I can't be neutral.
Right.
But it's impartial. Right? And so we have to be impartial. So if I go into a space, there's folks who lean right and folks who lean left, I need to be impartial, which means I need to critique both sides. Yeah. I can't just come in there pointing the finger at everybody on the right when I know there's some folks on the left that ain't, when it comes to a lot of convictions that Christians are supposed to hold, when it's talked about in their party, they don't say nothing.
Right.
They silent.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to find ways to affirm what I can in both sides and then critique both sides to say, and then from there, trying to diffuse it, right? So it's not us against them, or this is about one side showing that they were actually right the whole time. No, y'all both can be wrong. Yeah. Maybe to different extents, but y'all both get some things wrong. How do we come together based on biblical principles? Because we have a lot in common. We've got the same Great Commission, same Great Commandment, same Savior, on and on and on. We have a lot in common. How do we get to that and push away all this other stuff so we can speak clearly and build relationship? Again, not easy, but I've seen it done, and we continue to do it.
Man, the work you are doing is certainly not easy, but it is certainly necessary.
Amen.
Listen, we want to thank you for joining us. Before we leave, I always ask 3 questions to get folk to know you a little bit better. So let me ask you this. Right. Favorite sports team?
Favorite sports team, I would have to say the Chicago Bears.
The Chicago Bears?
Yeah, I'm a glutton for punishment.
I'm a Knicks fan. I understand. Okay. I understand completely. Favorite restaurant in the country?
Country.
You travel a lot, so I know you've eaten in some good places.
Man. I'm gonna have to say Lim's Barbecue in Chicago.
This is 2 for 2 with Chicago with you.
It's
2 for 2 with Chicago.
My wife's from Chicago. My dad's from Chicago, so I'm there.
Well, there you go. Yeah, there you go. Last but not least, one leadership lesson that Justin Giboney wants to share with the podcast audience.
That's a good question. Leadership lesson. I think patience, what I said earlier, if you're serious about this, nothing changes overnight. Sure. You know, I in reading books, I remember reading, I forgot which one it was, but even Dr. King through meetings where nobody came.
Sure.
So through that, you have to persevere through that. You have to have a level of patience to say, God told me to do this, and even though it doesn't look great right now, I got to be patient to see it through. Even if I have to change tactics, I have to have a level of patience, because I think people end up making some really bad choices, whether it's for funding or whatever, when they're rushing into it and they got to get it done immediately, and they don't have the patience to let God work in them, because there's things he has to do in us to get us ready for that success, so to speak, too. So be patient with yourself and be patient with the process and appreciate it.
Be patient, stay on your convictions, and continue to serve. Mm-hmm. Everybody, that has been Justin Giboney, the leader of the AND campaign. So excited to have him with us. If you want more information, go to, what's your URL for the AND campaign?
ANDcampaign.org.
Go to ANDcampaign.org. You can follow them on social and get more information there. This is good work. They're doing great work. We thank Justin for being with us, and we want you to follow them. But also follow us, like, subscribe. We want you to be a part of the TKN Leadership Podcast with Matthew Watley. We're here for you, helping leaders get to their next level. We'll see you next time.